What's up, ADHD crew? Today I've been thinking a lot about how ADD tends to go unnoticed, and it made me think about my own childhood. I think it really speaks volumes that it took me until adulthood to get the diagnosis, so it leads me to believe that it's especially common for children to fly under the radar. If you think about it, the amount of people with an inattentive type ADHD, or ADD as it's known, who don't discover it until adulthood and sometimes even into middle age is absolutely shocking. And it's also pretty sad to think that these people went through their entire lives without even realizing why they were the way they were. And then when they finally get that diagnosis, it makes a lot of sense to them. But the thing is with ADD, because people with that type of ADHD don't really have the hyperactive component, it's a lot harder to tell and it's a lot harder to read the signs. So maybe you're watching this because you suspect your child might have it. A lot of the times children who do have it are seen to be kind of introverted or shy or late social developers. They're falling behind socially, and that's what it was like for me. And that's because of the later development and maturity of the ADD brain. So it takes a little bit longer for somebody with ADD to be on the same level as a neurotypical person. So maybe your child is a bit of a slow learner, or they're really good at one thing but they're absolutely terrible at others and have zero interest in other things, yet they have this ability to hyper-focus on one thing. It could be a sign. And guess what? If your child has it, it's very likely that either you or your partner has it as well, genetically speaking. And you might not realize that you've had it your entire life. That's the crazy thing about it. Oftentimes when you get your child diagnosed, they'll test the parent as well, and that's where a lot of adult diagnoses happen. But things have changed a lot in the last 20 years. When I was a child, people didn't know anything about it, and I was just seen as a bit of an oddball, a bit of a dumb kid in some respects who couldn't follow instructions. And looking back at my childhood memories where the teachers would give me instructions and I'd be totally clueless because it would just go through one ear, out the other. I was listening, but it just didn't go in. I wasn't present and I just couldn't do anything about it. My brain just wouldn't absorb the info. But nowadays, it's getting very common to get diagnosis. It's increasing. The level of diagnosis is going up, and especially with girls, in women and girls. Apparently with girls it's a lot more common to have an inattentive type of ADHD, whereas with boys it's a lot more common to be seen as the hyperactive type. Now for me, I was the inattentive type, so I think with males with ADD it's a bit rarer. One sign that you or your child might have ADD is that you're always daydreaming, especially likely in the child. When I was in school, instead of running around and acting like a little brat, I was just daydreaming out the window. Have you got the answer for us, Stuart? No, sir. I zoned out. So if you suspect anyone has this, check to see how present they seem. A lot of the times people with ADD just don't seem like they're really there. They're sort of absent. Their eyes are open, but no one's at home, so to speak. Overwhelmed by loud environments. This can be another part of ADD where you're hypersensitive to sensations, auditory sensations, physical sensations. With me, it's more auditory. I really don't like loud environments. I've always shied away from, loud venues, concerts, things like that. Not so much as an adult, but when I was a child, I hated school discos. I avoided them like the plague. I couldn't stand it. I'd be full of anxiety and I'd be wanting to just avoid it all. The reason for this is because it's just overwhelming for the mind, and with ADD it's hard to process all of that. Another one is slow thought processing, or sluggish cognitive tempo. This is where there's going to be a delayed uptake of learning information and memory recall, and this afflicts people by making them appear a bit spaced out, and they find trouble getting their words out. They'll take a lot of pauses between their sentences, and they'll be a bit slow, especially maybe in the workplace. They'll seem a bit slow paced, and it's pretty frustrating because you can't really always do anything about it. Your mind is just elsewhere. You're distracted by thoughts, Have you ever been doing things absent-mindedly, or you put an item somewhere? You'll find you do that a lot with ADD. You weren't present in the moment. Another one is slow responses and slower reflexes. Did you know that people with ADHD or ADD respond around 180 milliseconds later than the neurotypical brain? And in fact, in the frontal regions of the brain, in the cerebellum, in the anterior cingulate cortex, are all 3 to 5% smaller than the neurotypical brain, and there's typically less blood flow to the right frontal lobe. Short-term memory impairment. Have you ever met somebody new and they've told you their name and instantly you forget it? Yeah, I've been there. It happens to this day. And it's so embarrassing because you're like, oh, I'm so sorry, I feel so rude. I can't help it, I just forget these things. You'll have a hard time recalling little details. You're possibly very good at remembering things from the past and remembering faces. I'm very good at remembering people's faces, but I can't remember things like what I ate yesterday. It's funny how it works. Another one is time blindness. This is where you have a very poor and misjudged perception of time. This is why you'll find yourself being late all the time, and you just don't really feel that sense of urgency when it comes to time limits and deadlines. Another one is zoning out mid-conversation. Have you ever been in a discussion with somebody and you feel really guilty because you've just not heard what they've said for the last 2 minutes? They'll be talking to you and you'll be looking at them and you'll be nodding your head to act like it's all going in, but it's not always going in. You're not picking up on everything and you might zone out. You might be thinking about what you're going to do tomorrow or on the weekend, or what movie you want to watch on Netflix next, and then you're back to the person's eyes. You're like, oh, sorry, what did you say again? Trouble following instructions. This is another classic. How many times has an employer told you how to carry out a certain task and within 2 minutes you've already forgotten some of the details? It's like trying to cram in a cube into a circular hole. It's too much info trying to get in there. That's why it's hard to recall all the detail. Low stress tolerance. I've always been very delicate when it comes to stress. I cannot handle a lot of stress. It makes me angry, it makes me upset. And it's hell, to be honest. It can be very difficult to cope with because people with ADD are often very sensitive, and I classify myself as quite a sensitive guy. I'm emotional, I'm very empathetic, and it's a burden, but it's a blessing at the same time. So, avoiding lots of detail. If you have ADD, chances are you just like having instantaneous gratification. It doesn't mean that you're spoiled or that you're impatient. It just means that, quite frankly, you zone out and get bored very quickly because your mind isn't able to engage as well as neurotypical people. That's it in a nutshell. I like it when life is very easy and straightforward. I like to make shortcuts, but also I think it's very good to make your life easier and try to find organizational tools so that you can have an easier life. This is why I'm saying don't just take your medication. You've got to try and learn new skills to organize yourself. And a final one is comorbid depression. Now, this is very common actually. People who have not had a diagnosis of ADD actually very commonly go to get help for comorbid mental illnesses such as anxiety and depression. I've had this myself when I was younger, and I always wondered, why have I got such chronic depression? It lasted for years. My self-esteem was incredibly fragile, and the smallest of things would crush me, and I always felt just completely useless and incapable of doing anything right. It got pretty bad that I had to go on antidepressants called citalopram. So if you have any of these symptoms together, it might be worth your while going to a psychiatrist to get tested. So I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I really hope that it helped. Perhaps you might be considering going to get tested, or you know somebody that you might help them to consider it. Thanks a lot for watching. Do subscribe if you haven't already and hit the notification bell, and best of luck to you. Cheers.